this momentum. I want to just keep this going. It's a real good energy. And I would like to say that the next speaker is going to be the last speaker for the day, but I want to introduce him and he's there already. So the speaker is a frequent keynote speaker at major industry conferences and is a widely published author of articles and research reports. I don't think I can think of any better to close the day today than Dave West. So I would like to welcome Dave, the product owner and CEO at Scrum.org. So in this talk, Dave is going to talk about the long-term impact of COVID-19 in the context of agility and how work may change. The talk is based on how some companies have built organizational and career models to support agility. So over to you, Dave.
You are on mute.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. You know, it is Sunday morning here in the United States, so please bear with me for a second. Thank you for inviting me. And thanks, Fazal. I really enjoyed that talk. I got up just to make sure my technology was working, and I watched the last half an hour. So maybe some of the things I'm going to be talking about now really have a good tie-in to the previous presentation, and talking about, you know, the sort of future of the world post-COVID. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. So firstly, as all of you, I'm sure, I'm in a house with children, so who knows what can happen at any moment. I'm actually on Cape Cod, which is a little area in the Boston area on the beach. We're in our family house by the ocean, and so who knows what can happen, but I really appreciate being invited today. Hopefully, even though it's Sunday morning, I'll be able to excite you a little bit with some of this stuff, and certainly have some fun as we go through the slides. Oh, now I have to press the right button. Oh, here we go. So I think you all know who Scrum.org is. I'm not going to bore you with that. Scrum.org, founded by Ken Schwaber. Actually, I was with Ken on Thursday, sitting outside in masks. We had a board meeting. He says hi. And he founded Scrum.org in 2009, and I run Scrum.org. We're about 340 trainers all over the world, some fantastic trainers in India who some of you may know, and some of them are on this presentation today. Pre-COVID, we were training between 5,000 and 7,000 people a month. Since COVID, it's now in the sort of 3,000 to 5,000 sort of numbers. After initial sort of stop, as it were. Certifications at about 20,000 a month, now a little bit less, probably like 17, 18. And of course, you know, we have these 340 trainers all over the world delivering Scrum training. So hopefully you know who we are. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. So if I was talking to you last year, I'd have tried to position agility in the context of massive business upheaval. Obviously, in the previous talk, you heard about some upheavals that are happening, particularly around fintech. But I'd have talked about Amazon moving into the medical sort of field, so CVS and Walgreens share price drop. I would be talking about how GE, a powerhouse in the industrial age, is now trading at $9 a share. I'd have talked about how Sears, you know, huge retailer, hundreds of years of experience, is closing store after store, including the store next to our office in Boston. But I'd also talked about how the modern next generation of companies are not exempt from chaos and change. Facebook, you know, is a great example of that. You know, they're continuously, though they're still making a large amount of money, and they are always under the public scrutiny. In fact, I think if Biden wins in November, it's very likely that, you know, there'll be another set of scrutiny driven by people like Elizabeth Warren. You know, so I talked about that. I talked about the age of change, but now I don't need to talk about any of those things. COVID-19 has massively illustrated the fact that the world is very changeable. That the reality is that the world we live in is this huge amount of change happening. And I always talk about Thomas Friedman as sort of like a really nice author describing it. And he describes change, or this age of acceleration, has been influenced by three things: the market, Mother Nature, and population growth, sort of climate change, population growth, and then technology innovation. Moore's law is the sort of like code for that, but it's a lot more than Moore's law. It's, you know, cloud computing, it's the application of DNA sequencing, it's, you know, it's all of that stuff. What's interesting is that COVID you could use as an example of all of these things. Obviously, population density and the relationship between people and what's happened because of climate change has created a perfect petri dish for COVID. We can talk about globalization, the fact that I can't get to the second day into the crisis, my son breaks his Nintendo Switch, drops it. Can't get a new one because of supply chains, and everybody wants one. So it just shows you how dependent we are on stuff all around the world. And obviously a technology that's being levied against COVID, you know, particularly in the Boston area because of the huge amount of biotech, you know, we're starting to see emerging slowly vaccines. They've gone into human trials in the US now, as I'm sure in Asia and in India, you're seeing some of that as well. The technology that's being deployed is pretty amazing. So now, the previous speaker was talking about, you know, change and the like, and how, you know, I would argue that we're in the industrial age at the moment, and we're just at this moment going through a tipping point. This is Cleda Perez, an economist that I follow, a fantastic economist in London. She's Venezuelan, but she lives in London, and she talks about these technology ages. And the moment we're very much still, most organizations are still, the way in which they manage work, the way in which they think about things is very much tied to this industrial age. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but ultimately the new age started in about 71 and is slowly going to replace that age as you see it in other ones. Now, you may notice that that turning point, every single turning point historically has been horrible. You can't argue that between 29 and 43, it was a little bit horrible. My grandfather actually was in India during that time, in the Second World War. He spent almost 4 years in India. What was interesting, it wasn't very nice times, right? Everybody can attest to that. 1890 to 95, example of that, Le Miserable, etc. The Bering crisis, global crisis has happened throughout the world. The point is that it's not surprising that turning points are challenging and pretty awful. However, after the turning point is something pretty amazing. You know, Golden Age, post-war, Belle Époque, the European progressive era, Victorian boom, the Great British Leap, etc. So Khalida says, and this is taken from a good friend of mine, Mick Kerson's work, that we're in this moment, this turning point as we move from, you know, production, you know, this sort of frenzy of capital investment in fintech, etc. We heard that a moment ago, into production capital, where, you know, it's much more systematic and consistent, and then we get into this deployment era. Now, bottom line is, I'm not an economist, as you could probably tell from that very poor description. Actually, I don't know what I am really. I'm a product guy, I guess, and I've written a few books. Yeah, I guess that's me. I'm a Leicester City fan. That's who I am, I suppose. But let me try to put that into the terms that I really understand, that maybe will connect to you all. So the age of mass production had these characteristics. It had these sort of long-term planning horizon, short-term profit, scarcity was the thing. So it's all about efficiency, specialization of labor. I am a business analyst. That's what I do. I'm not a tester. I'm not a developer. I don't talk to customers. I just take the stuff and I turn out specs and PCR docs and all this, you know, process control. But I'm controlled by a manager who makes sure that I've got enough work in my queue, etc. And management is king. That's all going away. That's changing, and that really sets the scene for where we're going as an industry. Start off with the planning horizons that I work to at Scrum.org are not long term. In fact, I have a year plan. You know, Ken and I sit down towards the end of the previous year, and we, celebrate the holidays, and we sit down and we talk about what do we think we should focus our resources on next year. And we did that at the end of last year. Guess what? We didn't use any of that. We're now replanning at the moment because COVID was not expected. Now, I know if we'd have been smarter, and we have trainers in China who were telling us this, but we weren't listening, and we got to learn to listen better, I think. But the bottom line is that, we're replanning. Live virtual classes weren't on my horizon in 2020. They were actually 2021, 22, for lots of reasons, mostly around its impact to the economics of our business model around the world. So that was interesting. So I had to do some planning around this. The other thing that's interesting is, and we've seen this throughout the crisis, the community and my team have continuously gone back to what is our mission? How do we have impact? It's not, and Ken talks about this. Yes, we have to break even and, pay for the office. Not that anybody's there now, right? We have to pay for lots of t-shirts because, you wouldn't be a company like us without printing t-shirts. But the bottom line is that it's not about short-term profit. It's about that impact long-term. It's about innovation, doing, we're in this world of abundance. I have a website that many of you go to. About 1.2 million people go to it every month. And it's running on AWS, and it cost me about, actually lately it's cost me over $2,000 because more people are going to it, but we don't talk about that. But the point is that we have a massive opportunity to do amazing things. The fact that we can bring out a new test, a new assessment, and 100 people have done it within a couple of hours, so we get great feedback. The fact that our LVC training, I can jump into a training class delivered by Sanjay or any of the other people all around the world and say, hi, and they normally throw me instantly out because I'm a disaster and I confuse everybody. But the point is, we live in this very, very interesting world. And specialization of labor, I have to say, I don't want specialists in my team. I want people that have passion, have energy, have the ability to learn, are smart, but are willing to do whatever it takes, because I'm not totally sure what specialist skills I'm going to need next sprint, or the sprint after, or the sprint after there. And self-organizing decentralization has replaced this process control. Scrum is a very lightweight process, right? We get that. The reason why is because we don't know exactly infinitely how to tell you exactly how to build amazing products or deliver amazing outcomes. What we do know is if you plan in these chunks called sprints, have a backlog, make it visible, we know those things. That's very simple. And ultimately, management isn't the most important role anymore. Creators, people that actually deliver value, people that understand the customer are the most important. We've moved to a different age. We've moved from the industrial idea of scarcity to the model of abundance. And that is super, super interesting, because it really changes our mindset, and it changes how organizations approach problems. But unfortunately, and we'll talk more about this in the middle, we're kind of in the middle of this change. We want to be, because everybody has told us from the moment that we're born that these big industrial organizations, and you either aspire to be one of these or you work in one of these, you get promoted up through the ranks until you're managing, multiple teams, and you have a personal assistant, you sit in a corner office, to something where there's these more smaller kind of organic little teams of people all rapidly being deployed to deal with, and to use the biology metaphor, to deal with the virus of the opportunity that's hitting your system, as it were. So the future seems to be, if I was going to describe it, is that we build these systems that are responsive, dare I say, agile. And the way we do that is by a focus on building teams aligned to the customer, so the outcomes that we seek, the mission that we're on. And then we support them with an infrastructure, a system that basically nurtures these teams and enables them to be as effective as they possibly can. It's a kind of different way of thinking about work. super interesting. And I don't think, even though we could argue that Spotify and ING and you know, Tesla and SpaceX and these companies have solved all of this, I don't think we have quite yet. But we've got some leading indicators of some ideas that I'm going to share with you today. Because ultimately, personally, and probably for you, this new world isn't about, you know, you're not a venture capitalist, you're not, I mean, some of you may be, I don't know. You're not, you know, you're not a government leader. What you are is working in these systems. And so this future has a huge implication on work, and there's been a lot written about it. These are just a few things that I just pulled in. I particularly like The Economist, obviously I would, you know, British and all that. The Economist did a very interesting article about this sort of like this tension between the gig economy and this desire by millennials in particular to feel part of something. How super interesting is that, right? So you've got this sort of like desire to be part of something, the Spotify model of tribes, of guilds, of chapters, you know, this sort of like, I'm part of something. And this really interesting idea that, well, I just care about my own work. I move from gig to gig. You know, it's my own portfolio. How do we marry those two worlds? That's super interesting. You know, the Business Week article was all about how technology is going to feature, how this idea that AI combined with humans, you know, maybe over time that becomes a stronger relationship. And then Davos, or the World Economic Forum, were more talking about this sort of like more spiritual element of work. And it's sort of very interesting. And I pulled out two of these views because I thought this sort of highlighted some of the characteristics that we need to start thinking about when we're building our own skills portfolio. And they're things that I wrestle with every day. I'm a product person. I described myself as earlier, and I haven't done that for a while. But you know, some of the skills that I have been very much built on the industrial age, and I'm sort of having to step away from that a little bit. So Davos, the World Economic Forum, talks about these things. I'm not going to read them. You can all read them and you'll get access to the slides afterwards. But I'm going to highlight a couple of things that I thought was really interesting. Networking, they call it coordinating with others. EQ, emotional intelligence, the yes and idea, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And cognitive flexibility. What this highlights is you work with others. Human beings are difficult, emotional, not necessarily logical. You need to build this network of people to effectively deliver value. And it's about creativity and, dare I say, entrepreneurism. The Singularity University, you know, Dean Kanan, etc., they're a little bit mad, but they think we're all going to go into the singularity at some point. I'm not totally sure I agree with them. However, they have a very interesting view. You know, they've pulled out communication, curiosity, critical thinking, collaboration. Now you might say, well, these aren't different to what, you know, surely these skills are useful in the industrial age. Well, then why do the people that get promoted, they're not necessarily very good at emotional intelligence. They're not critical thinkers. They're very good at systems and process, and they're very good at managing up. They're not necessarily very good at delivering value. So I think there is a tipping point that we're going through, or a turning point around skills that we look for. So what has Scrum.org been doing about this? Well, there's two things that we've been sort of researching or thinking about, which is very much, one's very much about the person. Are there a certain set of personality traits that thrive in this world? And we did some work with McKinsey that we'll talk about around that. The second one is, what does the organization look like in this new world? These are the two things that we've been sort of thinking about. So let's start with the first one. Is there a certain type of person that thrives in the world? Yes, it's me. No, unfortunately, I don't think it is. Well, I don't know. That's going to be, there's definitely some things that I have to do better. So when we look at the personalities and the world that we live in, if you're going to use this sort of like version of the Cynefin chart, this is an older version of Dave Snowden's work. Probably out of all the work, it's the only thing I understand because he's far too smart and uses far too many long words for me. But he talks about complex compared to complicated. The people that are more able to live effectively in this complex world, the ability to respond, to, you know, to sense, to not be dogmatic about stuff, where process emerges. How many people feel comfortable with process emerges? How many people want to define the process up front? This is exactly what we're going to do, and then get really uncomfortable when that changes. That's the challenge in this world. So is there a certain type of person that's good at this? So this is the research that we did with McKinsey. And by the way, working with McKinsey was fabulous. They have like all these really smart people that do analytics and data and write great surveys that actually get at the crux of the matter. It was fantastic. So we worked with them on this. And first we started what were the top traits. So we did some work where we identified using basically, you know, everybody used lots of words, and we found the words that were sort of clustering. And this is the result. There was 3 things that sort of came out. Ability to handle ambiguity. Now, no surprise there. Agility, ambiguity, same thing really, different words, but very similar. But the ability to handle it and, dare I say, thrive in it. That's an interesting sort of perspective. That they're more, the people that in this world care, they don't care how you get there, they care the outcome. So they're the sort of random people that try different things to get to an outcome. You know, when you're, yeah, there's I've noticed 2 types of people. When you've got a problem, some people just sit and we can't leave until we've fixed it. Some people say, hey, let's step away from this problem for a minute. Let's go for a walk. Let's talk about music. Let's listen to some music. Let's try something different. They're more focused on getting to the outcome than the work to get there. You know, I thought that was interesting. And they're all about teams. They're all about teams rather than individual, which is actually quite challenging when you look at that sort of gig economy concept. When you look at the fundamentals of the United States, which is all about individualism, right? Which is some of the problems we're having with COVID today. But they're all about the team, and that's super interesting. So the research took those things, and we focused on actually, because we're working with Scrum Masters, which meant they apparently can't be involved in the research because they're helping us execute it. So they're sort of inside the bubble. We talked to we got data from 2 roles, product owners and team members. So product owners, you know, they weren't always called product owners, honestly. Sometimes they were business representatives. Sometimes they were, sometimes they, dare I say, use the word managers. Some of them were, and then team members were in Scrum teams, and this was predominantly focused on Scrum teams and working in that way. So the research we used, the first test that we used was around, we sort of modified something called the 5-factor model or the ocean model. The ocean model is the classic magazines. If you ever go into one of your supermarkets, one of our supermarkets, a supermarket, and you see, you know, they got these magazines at the thing, and you pull it while you're waiting to check out. And are you allowed to do that now with COVID? I don't know. Anyway, so you pull it and you read it, and there's a like, who's your perfect mate, right? Who should you spend the rest of your life with? And you do one of these tests. It's the big 5 is being used extensively to identify who your perfect partner is. That might be why you've seen this before. It always turns out mine is completely the opposite, but doesn't matter. So we took that, and we added this ambiguity thing to it, and we executed that. You'll see some agreeableness, being an extrovert, conscientiousness, openness, and narcissism. You know, and by the way, narcissism isn't always bad, but that's another thing. So this is what we found from our study. Now, you might say the sample size is relatively small. We only executed the first version of this, the MVP, to determine whether this actually works, and we've actually we're still on our backlog. Unfortunately, COVID has completely blown this up, so we're not doing it at the moment. It was on our backlog to start to do a bigger sample size and see if there's findings, and we've got some modifications to the study, but I'm still going to share because I think it's sort of interesting. A couple of things that stand out in this. First thing is, and I've only got 25 minutes, we've got lots to cover, right, is the team members don't have to be extroverts. Hang on a minute, you're saying. I don't believe a word you're saying. You know, every agile conference I go to, we spend the first like 50 minutes getting to know each other and being all like peoply and hugging and talking, you know, and doing a fist of fives every 5 minutes. And it seems to me that agility is all about people that are extroverts. Turns out that actually you don't need to be an extrovert to be super successful in an agile or a scrum team. And actually that isn't important. You do to be a product owner. And the reason predominantly is because product owners have to spend a lot of time managing stakeholders. So managing that network to make sure that they're making the right value decisions. So that's challenging if you don't like people. Now, I'm not saying extroverts don't like people, sorry. When you're not empowered, when you don't get your energy from people, which I thought that was super interesting. The other thing that was really interesting was agreeableness. This was a little bit of a surprise. I thought, now, maybe because I've spent, 35, oh my God, 30 something years in industry, that being agreeable was not an image that we wanted to send to the world, right? Straightforward, altruistic, compliant, kind, modest. What's all that about? We're meant to shake our sticks and be like, no, this is my opinion, I'm going to fight for it. In fact, sometimes it's more important to look like that than actually get the thing right. But it turns out that what we saw over and over again, and we did some interviews to sort of back this up, was that the most important characteristic in Agile team for both product owners and team members is the agreeableness. We then discovered that we weren't the only people that have found this. Google did a huge study, which was, I took the New York Times article here, but you can just Google it. No surprise there, right? Project Aristotle, I think it's called. And they were looking for what built the most high performance team. Because they were really interested. They have thousands of teams, certainly hundreds when they did the study, maybe thousands now. Really cool place to work, by the way. I got many stories of my visit to Google. But they wanted to know what made them tick, and they hired from all these Ivy League super high-end schools and the best engineering candidates from across the world. And they found that they weren't necessarily the best teams. What they found was the most important characteristic of any team was psychological safety or trust. And trust was created by people that had a high amount of agreeableness. That doesn't mean they shirked from difference of opinion. In fact, they didn't. Instead of those saying, no, you're wrong, they said, hey, that's really interesting. Tell me why you've got that. I've got a completely different view, but I could be completely wrong here. And then they moved through it like that. Yes, and not yes, but. Super interesting, hey? Agreeableness. Now, I have to say personally, I find this really challenging. I'm I don't know, a very passionate, energetic person, maybe. I think that would be a good way of describing. So when somebody comes at me with a difference of opinion that's outside my bubble, outside my perspective, what I tend to have a problem with is listening to them. I tend to spend my entire time trying to formulate why they're wrong in my head. And I'm actually I'm trying super hard to step back from my own opinions and go into a learning stance when somebody says something that I don't necessarily agree with. Now that's super hard at work, even harder outside work. When you see somebody with a hat that you don't agree with or has a, whatever on it, particularly in these very turbulent times or very divisive times. But to go in with a learning stance, because what I've learned is if you want to get anywhere in the world, particularly inside our organization, but also in terms of your energy in the world, if you can do that, it changes everything. Anyway, so we used that psychological tests, and that was sort of super interesting. The next one is around work values. Now you can see this is a standard model that we used, been used probably hundreds of thousands of times before. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it. Pride in product, customer. Oh, we added a couple of things: openness to change, pride in product, transcendence, self, and we modified it slightly. But we found this. Now, I was less interested by this. The only thing that was a little interesting was the fact that everybody needs to be focused on the customer, not just the product owner. Yes, the product owner has to embody that, But what was very telling from the analysis and the research that we did, and as I say, the sample size is relatively small, it was a really complicated survey and then interviews. So we've had to work out how to shrink it a little bit to make it more scalable. And that's what we were working on before COVID hit. But there's a couple of things that were super interesting, well, quite interesting. One is that everybody has to care about customers, right? Now, when we talk about T-shaped employees, we talk about that, or comb-shaped or pie-shaped. What we often don't really talk that much about is what are those, and maybe Gunther talked a little bit about this in his section earlier, but what is that T bit? One important element of that T is the focus on the outcomes we're trying to achieve, the customer, which is super interesting. The thing that's really missing for most organizations is when I walk in, I see fabulous Scrum boards, Kanban boards, lots of burn down charts, lots of stuff. I very rarely see personas on the wall. So, could I find on your Confluence site, because now we're working remote, or your team space, can I see your personas? Can I see who the customer is? When I go to a sprint review, do we talk about the impact of this increment, the work that we've done, the results of this sprint in the context of a customer? What does it mean to that customer? What does it mean to that customer persona? That's the things that we're super interested in. And some other things, openness to change. Yes, team members, there's a propensity for engineering teams in particular to believe so strongly in the thing that they create that they're not willing to throw it away. That can actually end up causing a lot of problems. Product owners need that less. And then apart from that, nothing really super interesting. So no real surprises. Reminders, I guess. Pride in product, customer centricity, pride in product, openness to change. Some characteristics. Now, the study that we did, we actually turned it into an interview guide. So if you're hiring somebody and you're like, let's see how agile they are. And by the way, these are just ideas. Don't think of this as the Bible. You might want to use some of these questions as a mechanism to ask who they are and find out what kind of characteristics they have. So have a look at the study. It's on scrum.org. Download it, use it. I know the sample size is a bit small. We're working on it. And we don't expect everybody to do the same. What we are expecting is for you to be aware and to be thinking about this stuff, Think about it. Make sure that you have an idea in the back of your mind. We don't expect automatons. We don't expect, we're not sort of George Orwell making sure that the state is managing, oh my God, he's not got enough EQ, we should beat him. We're not doing that. Anyway, and I know we've got like 15, 18 minutes left, so I'm going to whiz through, got lots still to do. So we talked about the personality traits, right? So we looked at this agreeableness was a bit of a surprise, openness to change, product centricity, all this kind of stuff, or customer centricity, where we've got an idea of the kind of person. Now, the friction with, is this a kind of person that thrives in an organization or is a gig person, we didn't explore. And that's something I'd like to really dissect at some future point. But we're starting to get an idea of these sort of characteristics. And maybe there's no real surprises to you, but from a personal point of view, it definitely challenges some of my status quo about who I am and what success means in terms of how I behave every day. Now the question is, where do these people, where do they slot in? How do they fit in to this organization or this system or this process or work with other people like managers? And that's the second question. And this is what this is the industrial age. After spending many years in a job, working long hours, mastering every strange nuance of the system, you're promoted to a manager. Woohoo! You go out, you have a big knees up with the family and maybe a few beers, and you're like, yay, I'm on it, I've succeeded. And then suddenly you're responsible for people doing your job that you used to do, and suddenly then you realize how difficult it is working with people and how bizarre everything is. You then, after time, get promoted. After you prove that you can play the politics, manage up, you're promoted to manage them, and then manage managers, and then manager. And then changing jobs just changes where you start. The game continues. That's got to change. adds no value. We've got thousands, dare I say millions of people in the world who don't add any value. This is the problem. What we need instead is we need to really allow teams of creators to provide them with purpose and to direct them on a journey of value. You know, we see Dan Pink's work here, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. People are motivated massively, extrinsically motivated by autonomy, mastery, and purpose, giving teams the freedom and individuals and teams the freedom to control their own destiny, to give them the support to become masterful in their skills and to deliver, you know, to become better at it every day. You know, I learned something yesterday. How cool is that? And then give them a purpose that resonates. So we don't talk, when we talk about features that we're delivering, we don't just talk about them in the context of the feature, we talk about them in the context of the value that it gives to a human being, that how this impacts stuff. Now, some of those features might be, this stops us getting sued, you know, we have to do this because of, you know, GDPR, and, you know, ultimately, let's think about, even though it's a mandate, maybe we can think about the impact of privacy to our customers, you know, things like this. You know, ultimately, this is the future, not that model of getting promoted. And being a great creator, working in a team with a purpose that actually delivers value is perhaps incredibly valuable to you and to the company you're in. I talked briefly about this T-shaped, but the customers plus business skills equal magic. Ultimately, you need to understand that business context. You need to, it's not the product owner like hiding it and just feeding it to you, and that skill is hoarded by the product owner. You know, you bring in your technical skills. Maybe it's development, maybe it's business analysis, maybe it's testing, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's product marketing, maybe it's, you bring all these skills in, but in that context, so you ask better questions of your customer. Now you support the technical skills that you have or specialist skills that you have with a community that might be inside or outside your world. That is the thing that's really going to be changing. We're building organizations that are people-centric, and yes, I call it a nexus, you could call it a tribe, doesn't really matter. You can call it whatever you want, really. Value stream, but ultimately it's a chunk of the value stream that which could be the whole value stream or a chunk of it or whatever. You have a group of teams. Also, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Oh, excuse me. You have a group of teams that are maniacally focused on delivering to, oh, excuse me. Sorry, it's just allergies, I promise. You have a group of teams focused on that value stream. If we're doing Spotify, this is a tribe and these are squads. Those team people have a particular set of skills that are supported by some sort of community of practice, center of excellence, or we could call that a guild or anything that you want. I don't really care what they're called, but your teams are focused on delivering values to customers. You have then a separate organization that supports you in your skill set, as it were. You get promoted not by what you've done for the customer. You get bonus by that, you get incentivized, you get, you know, rewarded, but you get promoted for how you help others get better at their craft. So it's about helping others get better. You know, you build this skill-based community that's very, very focused on helping others get better. You know, it's sort of, I mean, you could use martial arts, you could use any of these analogies, but it's not what did you do today? Yeah, that's important. You need to deliver value to your customer. It's who did you help as well? Those two things are balanced, and ultimately an organization provides an environment around that for success. And that is how you scale the skills and scale the ideas inside your organization. You create a learning culture. That means, though, that leadership changes. That historically, and just as I became a CEO, of course, it flipped. So I always thought that I was the top and I'd be carried around in one of those little Roman bed things. But it turns out that now I do the carrying. You know, everybody is around supporting these delivery teams, these teams focused on delivering value to customers. And everything else is irrelevant. We try to help make the right choice. So where do we give the money? Help add the, the environments, provide the support. But that's all our job is. The most important people in an organization, the people engaged with the customer, delivering value to the customer.
Dave, I just want to slip in that we have 5 minutes before we can take the question answer from the participants.
I'm whizzing there. Thank you. So that means that we need to create an environment that really supports this, which is very, very different. It means that management is all about change agent, servant leader, coach, mentor, facilitator, teacher, and you still do some management as the maturity of your team grows over time. It means that values become super important. It ultimately means that your organization fundamentally has to change to support these little organisms that are delivering value to customers. So what does all this mean? What is the sort of end story? The future of work, this agile thing is a lot more than just a different process. It has huge implications to how the organization structured, the technology, which we haven't talked about at all today, and the process to support it. This change requires us to shift our thinking about what is important in terms of personality. We hire for different skills now. Well, we hire for different things, traits that we think become important. We think about team and human beings first, and we foster those skills in our own organization. We need to better serve our outcomes. So we need to align to the customer, these teams, and then just get out of their way. And basically, as a leader, my entire job is not to hoard information, it's to free the teams to deliver value. And it's hard, I'll be honest. The amount of times I want to tell people what to do instead of trying to just surface the challenges and help them come to the solution. It's really, really challenging. And it's actually made me think about my skills as a leader, as a product leader every day. So I'd just like to leave one thing before we get to questions, and I apologize, but Leicester are playing in about 2 hours, so I can bring them up. When you build a team or an organization that is customer-centric, that empowers and frees the people to deliver the value that they can, you can do great things. Leicester City won the Premier League 4 seasons ago. Their entire cost was $23 million or pounds. I can't remember which in this thing. I think it's pounds, actually. Man United, who finished 8th, was 195 million pounds. The bottom line is, if you're a leader today, or you're one of these players today, just in a different environment, you can be a lot more successful. So working in a complex world requires great teams directed by inspirational product owners with a clear vision. The ultimate success of an organization is the combined capability of these people. If you can do that, you can change the world. And I believe that you, as you're here, you're probably more likely to be doing that than anybody else. So thanks for your time. I know we've got about 5 minutes for questions. Any questions? I haven't watched any of the chat, by the way, because you're on this screen and my other screen's over there. So gosh only knows, you're probably like saying, who is this mad guy and why didn't he stay in bed?
I'm here to assist you in that, and thanks a lot for so much to share with us. I think as the last part of the day today, we have got a lot to think over and a lot to really implement in our own way. So I have a few more hands here. So I'll start with Govindraj. So Govindraj, you are going to be allowed to talk. You please unmute yourself.
Govindraj, you're allowed to talk now. I wish my wife said that more frequently.
I still need to get out from the Scrum call modes.
No worries, Magna.
Okay, Govindraj, can you hear me?
Hello.
Let's see.
I'm not. It's like directing traffic, isn't it?
I think we can take somebody else. Maybe Nitish.
Yeah. Thanks, Archika, for helping me there. Nitish. Archika, can you help me get them to allow to talk? I think my system is not really friendly today.
Story of my life, actually. My system's never friendly.
I have added Nitish. So Nitish, you can
Yeah, I'm
unmute
here.
yourself.
Yeah. Hey Dave, my question
Hello.
is, hey, my question is more upon how to build more upon culture and cater more towards the EQ.
It's really, really hard. I'll just
I
say
know.
that officially. You think that building products is hard? Helping people change is almost impossible. I'm not told. So that's what you need to do, is get a job where you just talk about it and then you don't have to do it. It's brilliant. I recommend it. No, but seriously, I think the first thing that you can do is start acting the way, sort of like mirroring the behaviors that you expect. Now, this isn't an organizational sort of level. This is very much on a personal level. But by mirroring the behaviors that you expect, then that starts creating an environment where people can at least see that these things can work and can add value. So a classic example is really when somebody comes at you with a difference of opinion, respond in a very supportive way of that difference of opinion and listen to them. Active listening, powerful questions, active listening. Those things are a really good start to changing the way in which you interact with people. The other important point is actually making these things transparent. I guess it's a complex problem, right? So transparency really helps. So sometimes what I try to do is I try to actively, after any meeting, send a little survey that talked about asks certain questions. It asks a question around how open, how much progress did we make? How open were we all as a group to listening? Sort of like measure listening, measure progress. Those sort of characteristics, and start building some retrospective capabilities by making these things transparent. It's not easy. I think the other thing is that there's a lot of people that don't think it's worth investing time trying to become a better human being. But it's funny, there's such a tying between becoming a better human being, being more aware of these things, and the value that you deliver. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're all in the business of doing, trying to deliver more value and do it in a humane way. And if you can make people aware of that and just talk, make them understand how that can help, then it's brilliant. Also, some very practical things like liberating structures, things like powerful questions. Those things can really, really help change the dynamic, change the flow, which can ultimately help. Hopefully that answered your question. It's not easy though, tricky.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nitish. So Dave, the next one is
Pankaj,
Pankaj.
you could, you could mute yourself.
Hi Dave.
Hi.
I'll start with the APL example that you gave. So, am I audible first?
Yeah, Pankaj, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah, this Sunday it will be Man U versus Leicester, so I am hoping Man U will go through.
Oh, well, you're dead to me. I'm not answering your question. You do know the best way of getting somebody to answer your question isn't to tell them about their competing football team at the start. There's a little tip.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the senior leadership team. So how to coach them in order to change their fixed mindset and move to them towards the agile mindset, because it is the key for any successful transformation or successful.
Yeah. Yes, I hear you. I think honestly, there's another key, which is the middle management. I think they're actually really key to success. However, the executive, if you don't change the executive management and their mindset and how they approach it, then the middle management will never change, because ultimately the executive management set the mission, the incentives, the targets, the KPIs for the middle management, which then ultimately results in the middle management which changing, which then ultimately results in chaos. So there's a few things that I see as fundamental manifestations of the problem of executive leadership. One is the way in which they deal with conflict and priority. So conflicts, how do conflicts get resolved inside their own team and outside their own team? That is something that they need to be more wary of, because that can ultimately send signals across the organization. So I spend some time on that. The other thing is around prioritization. Successful agile organizations are very good at making decisions, even if they're the wrong ones. Because we learn quite quickly. Leadership historically in the industrial age, because efficiency and effectiveness is so important, not only do they hate making decisions, but they hate being responsible for the outcomes of those decisions. So the other thing that I spend a lot of time with them is thinking about priorities and helping them really make decisions on that. I was at a large insurance company in the UK end of last year, and I was speaking to their PO community, and their COO, this multi-billion-dollar business, came and spoke, and they're going to have a hard time because one of the questions that was leveled at him was, look, we're getting conflicting priorities from each of the business leaders. Can you help us deal with that? And he said, no, I can't help you there. That's always going to happen. Whereas he should have said, yes, let's sit down and hammer out the clear priorities to this business so that you have a clear direction to move forward. That was a great example of an anti-pattern. So prioritization is super. The last element that I always do with executive leaders, actually I'm doing this with an insurance company at the moment virtually, and it's really challenging, is actually get involved with the teams. See them, go to sprint reviews, go attend, the odd daily, help them do some sprint planning, make them aware of how to do it. And then I guess the last thing is like maybe they can use some of these techniques themselves to run their own organization, meaning the senior leadership work. And we see that quite effectively. Obviously, Jeff Sutherland is a huge fan of that with Scrum at Scale. I'm not necessarily as, I think it's one element of the work that they do, but I'd see that quite successful as well. Hopefully that answers your question, even though, well, the last game of the season is going to be a very interesting one, Man U and Leicester.
Yeah.
I'll be watching it and hoping not for Man U. Sorry, mate. Well, let's hope Chelsea completely destroys themselves, so it's Man U and Leicester going into Europe.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks a lot, Pankaj. I know there are a lot of questions coming in and a lot of people wants to ask a question, but we might be running a little out of time. So that's going to be all on the question answer side. Okay. Although we'll try to collate all the questions and get answers as much as possible. So we'll relay that information later.